Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I'm your host, Larissa and R, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team. My hope is to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Preparing students for college and careers is a critical part of education, and today we are digging into how we can do it effectively. Joining us is the incredible Coach Rudy, also known as R. Keeth Matheny, a national award-winning teacher and speaker with a passion for social, emotional, and academic development. And although he has an extensive bio, he is most proud of being once given a Neighborhood Father of the Year award and having a breakfast taco named after him at a local restaurant.
Yeah, that's
Rudy
the best.
Brings so much energy and wisdom to the table. And we're also going to share a little bit about his exciting webinar that we have with him and School Connect happening in January. So welcome to the podcast, Coach Rudy, or welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, I'm excited to be back, Larissa. I had a great time last time. It was a great conversation, and right before the keynote for the Branching Mind Summit last December, and that went beautifully well. And I've just really enjoyed being able to connect with Branching Minds and to talk to you. And I'm excited to dig into this topic today.
Well, we're excited to have you back because this is a topic that we haven't talked a ton about. I mean, a lot of what we talk about is really helping students have the skills and the ability to be successful in school and how we can support them. And so this is just a little bit more of that, especially at the secondary level. I think we talk a lot more about college and career readiness, but it does start, when they're young as well. So first of all, I want to ask, since we're talking about this, if there was a career fair at your high school, and maybe think back about when you were young, what were the tables that you were visiting at the career fair?
It's a fun question to think about. So I would say my favorite one would probably have been, at the time I thought I wanted to be a lawyer or a psychologist. So both of those probably would have been things that I would have been looking at. I would have been looking at, potential different colleges that I might be interested in. As far as, deeper into career, I'm not really sure, but it's one of those things that's really interesting. You start off thinking one path, and then as you reel in that goal, new paths open, which is what I think most students go through as well. That we don't often, pick what we're going to be in kindergarten and stick with that all the way through. But having something that we're motivated about gives us that motivation to do that day in and day out work that helps open those doors to all kinds of possibilities. So I think it's really important that we help kids create a vision for what kinds of careers they might be interested in and start to really think about a vision for their life.
Yeah, I think about a lot of times let me start by saying I helped organize a career fair when I was in the schools. And we really tried to find a variety of different careers because students were like, they had those set careers like teacher, police officer, sports athlete, movie star, like those really apparent, well represented in their lives careers, but sometimes getting them in front of people that are doing careers that they have no idea was really important. And I think you're right, because, you may be going into life or even going into college thinking one career path, and then something transforms and you get another. And so I think it's really
today with all of the emerging technology, and I mean, most of the careers that, probably our students will be doing don't even exist probably right now. So it's really interesting times to live in.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to talk about that as well, of just thinking about it's not so much about preparing them for one career, but providing them the skills. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that. First of all, I would love for you to talk a little bit about what college and career readiness means. Like, how do you define it?
So I really think of it like a tree metaphor. What we want for college and career readiness is we want students to have roots in core academic skills, things that really give them a good foundation of understanding of the world. But then we really want to develop a very strong and well-developed trunk of human skills, uniquely human skills, our EQ skills, our ability to be resilient, to manage strong emotions, to effectively communicate, to collaborate effectively. Those human skills are incredibly important. And then we also want the branches that are that growth mindset, that love of learning, that willingness and openness to learn and master new emerging technologies. I really believe college and career readiness is about building that really strong, mighty oak that has those deep roots in academics, those strong EQ skills, and then also that love of learning and growth mindset to be able to access, new emerging technology. I think that the future of work is really going to belong to those who have, IQ, EQ, and AI and emerging tech skills in the future.
Well, and we were talking before this podcast a little bit about something that made me think about some of those skills that are needed in the workforce. And so, when we talk about those key skills, academic, social, emotional, what have you found essential for students to succeed in college or even just in the workforce?
First, I just want to think back to, that opening where you talked about, the kind of goofy award things. Parenting is a big part of how we get people ready, and we're playing a long game as educators. It's that same model of we're trying to grow great humans, who can launch and be successful in the world and happy and we're thinking about, what are the skills that really, really are going to make a huge difference? And, I had a former student reach out to me and he asked me to fill out this application, this recommendation for employment. And I was really blown away. There were only 15 questions on the survey that he sent me, but some of the questions were really interesting. And I wanted to kind of highlight a couple of those questions. So one of the questions was, can the candidate treat people, including those from different backgrounds, belief, gender, with fairness and respect? And then I have to put strongly disagree, neutral, agree, or strongly agree. And then it says, can the candidate persist when faced with obstacles and setbacks? Again, strongly disagree, all the way through. And then can the candidate independently manage their own time and show good judgment when prioritizing work to meet deadlines? Same concept. And then one of my favorites is, can the candidate listen carefully when others are talking, enough time to understand and ask appropriate questions without interrupting? And then my favorite one of all is this one. Can the candidate exhibit maturity and self-control even in situations involving conflict or stress? For example, they never threaten to abuse others physically or verbally. And if I answer anything other than strongly agree to question number 11, that candidate has no chance because no longer are they an asset. They are fully a liability. And the reason I'm pointing this out is that the reality is the buck stops here with our emotional intelligence skills. We are hired for these skills. We are promoted for these skills, and we are fired for a lack of these skills. And I think we need to be thinking very intentionally about how do we grow these skills in our young humans and help them really develop these in very powerful way, because those are the skills that are going to not only get them employed and make them successful in college or whatever career they choose, but also these are the skills that make for great humans and great relationships and great spouses and great parents and great community members. And they are skills we really need to think about. How do we systematically grow?
Love that survey. I feel that kind of recommendation, because I think especially for young people going into the workforce, to really lay out what makes a good employee.
Where do we learn these skills? I mean, seriously, where do we learn that number 11, how to control ourselves even in times of conflict? Where do we learn and practice that?
Especially for young people that don't have a lot on their resume, or they don't have a lot of references. I think having those skills, or having even an understanding that you need those skills, is just even that awareness of like, oh, I need to know how to manage conflict with people without raising my voice or making it violent or whatever. Like, I need to have those
Amen.
skills. Let's talk a little bit about how you think that some of those skills are developed. What are some of the things that you're seeing that our schools are doing that are developing some of those skills?
Well, I think first you got to recognize what are the skills. What are the skills we're really looking for? I really like the work of the profile of a graduate. We're seeing a lot of districts develop out a really strong profile of a graduate. What do we want our graduates to have? And I think that's really powerful. And I think after you think about what are the skills that we're looking for, and I think we really need to make sure we're focusing in those three categories of those roots of strong academic skills, right? But then that core of strong, uniquely human skills. And then also that ability to, be open-minded and have that growth mindset to access emerging tech. I think all of those are really important that we need to be thinking about. But also we need to think about how can we measure these skills to see, our students growing over the course of time and to recognize that, they grow at different paces, that, some flowers take longer to bloom and, that this is a learning environment and they need space to practice these skills and to make mistakes and then to grow from those mistakes. And then not only do we need to measure progress, we also need to be thinking about some targeted supports, for students who are struggling with some of these skills. But I think we need to continue to focus, yes, on helping kids be tech literate and digital literate and AI literate, all that. But while doing that, we need to continue to focus on collaboration and collaborative types of education where kids are talking to each other and we're not just all looking at screens. We need to be communicating with each other and building these skills, and we need to work in ways that create some fun stakes. So I really am a big fan of that low tech gamification where we're creating activities in the class that make for little fun competitions or games that students play together with the content. And so I really love that. And then anything that helps them meaningfully practice social skills, I think are important. But when you ask about some exemplars, I love the schools that, like I said, the districts who have created those profiles of a graduate and then done a crosswalk to build lessons that tie into, okay, if we want kids to know how to collaborate effectively, when are we teaching that? Where is the lesson on that? How are we seeing the growth in that? And so there are lots of districts that I've been able to partner with that make that a meaningful practice. And it's great to have resources that are life skill developing resources like School Connect, which, shameless plug, I am a co-author of School Connect. It's a research and evidence-based curriculum that helps students grow these skills in meaningful ways. And there are many districts who have tied lessons from School Connect or other curriculums into their profile of a graduate, and then they try to measure progress on what's being taught and how the kids are growing those skills. So I think that's really best practice, and especially if you can involve communication with parents and other stakeholders, so the kids are not just learning it in a 20-minute advisory, but it's really being reinforced 360 degrees around them in their lives.
Well, and I think that idea of connecting it even into curriculum, because I was thinking about this as you were talking, I was like, when I have students that ask, like, why do we have to do group work? Like, all of my job is a group project, right? There's like,
Yeah,
I have so many collaborators on different things, and I know I need to know how to work with people.
we're
And
doing it
so
now.
even that, I think even helping educators, because my next question was really going to be like, what are some misconceptions about that teachers or educators have about some of these skills? And I was just thinking about what would it look like if schools started to connect some of those instructional strategies, right? Like a group project, or I was even thinking like the jigsaw instructional strategy, like some of those instructional strategies, connecting those to those soft skills. What would it look like for those things to happen so that we understand as educators, oh, I'm not only teaching them about this piece of content, but I'm also adding this skill and this skill. Like it's this standard, but also this life skill standard or whatever, and I think because there's so much layers to teaching, right? And
Yeah.
I think as a middle school teacher, so much of my job was just teaching students how to be human. I say that all the time, teaching seventh graders how to be humans. And it really is. It's really giving them those skills of how to interact with the world around them in a healthy and productive way to help build their skills and provide a foundation for their future. And so I was curious though, what other misunderstandings do you think educators have, or did I name them all?
No, I think you just made a fantastic point that I really want to highlight and make sure that everybody's hearing it. And that is that you can layer these soft skill supports while you're also delivering content. I used to call this meta EQ, meaning that while I'm teaching content, while I'm teaching whatever I'm teaching, I'm also having you practice these EQ skills we're talking about. So we might be doing a lesson on active listening, but then in that lesson of active listening, we might do a think, pair, share where I have you work on the components of active listening that we just taught. And so I think that, all of those good, strong teacher pedagogy strategies like think, pair, share, jigsaws, collaborative process, I forgot what it's called. Give me a second, philosophical chairs or, Socratic seminars, all these things that are collaborative that get kids collaborating, fish bowls, those kinds of things are not just great ways to teach, but they're also great ways to practice these soft skills, these emotional intelligence skills. And we need to teach the skills, and we need meaningful space to practice these skills. And I think that's the big misconception. We think either one or the other. We think that the advisory lesson on teaching kids to collaborate for 20 minutes has taught them to collaborate, right? And that's all we had to do. We're done. Check that box, we're done. Or we think that just by having them do group projects has taught them to collaborate. Check that box, we're doing collaborative work. They're learning how to collaborate. But nope, there are kids in those collaborative groups who we've never taught how to share the space equally that are dominating the projects while other kids go along for the ride. And so what we have to do is do both. We've got to teach kids the fundamentals of strong collaboration and provide space and practice in collaborating. But then that next layer is to find spaces for reinforcement and reflection, which is if we can share with parents and with other stakeholders, here's how we're teaching this. Please use that same language in your after school programs or in your conversations at home. Now we get kids not only learning how to collaborate effectively and practicing how to collaborate effectively, but getting it reinforced from key people that are helping them grow in their life.
Yeah. And I was even thinking about that, even just that step further of measuring it and making sure parents and staff are aware of like, hey, the student is struggling with group work. And,
Yeah.
having that being a part of the rubric, not as a necessarily grade level grade in the grade book, but having that understanding of here's where if we're layering, if we're having that meta EQ, right? We're layering that in our instruction. We're also having some sense of measurement of how well are they doing that? Do they need more explicit instruction? Do they need to have a small group about group work, right?
Yeah.
Those kind of things. Because I think that's how it integrates into MTSS is thinking through how do we layer that in there. As I'm talking, I think about that educator that maybe is listening like that sounds like another thing. And I just want to name that these are things that teachers are already doing in so many ways. We both know so many great educators that have those morning meetings with students and they talk about those skills. They sit down with that group that's struggling and going, okay, here's why we're doing group work. If they have ideas, you need to listen, or even those teachers that are practicing that active listening, whether you've prompted them or not, because those are just good, that's good pedagogy of just helping students with those skills.
Yeah, and agreed. And there's a chapter in my book, Excellent Teaching, which is called The Collaborative Cauldron, which is all about how do you intentionally get soft skill practice within good pedagogy, collaborative structures. And so I just wanted to point that out because it's there, but I 100% believe it. But on top of that, I wanted to give another fun example of things that we already do that is practicing a soft skill. We have lots of teachers that understand the importance of greet at the door. And when we greet at the door, we are working on our first impression skills. Students are working on shaking a hand and looking you in the eye and saying, good to see you. And those skills are really important for getting hired and getting promoted and what kind of salary you earn. If you can't shake somebody's hand and you can't look them in the eye and you can't say, hello, nice to meet you, I'm here for the job, you're going to have a hard time getting a job no matter what your resume looks like. And I think that practice is important, but also having a lesson on how to make a first impression and, even maybe having some fun and making some gamification with having the state's best shake competition where you're competing with your classmates for the best shake, first impression handshake. All of those things come out of the lessons that I'm a part of in School Connect, but also those are things that teachers are often already doing, maybe not the intentional lesson, but that's where you get that really multiplier effect when you teach the lesson. And then every day when you're shaking the hand, you're reinforcing some of those skills from that lesson so they can really own that, get practice in it, and then transfer that skill to their life. And I can't tell you how many of my former students talk to me about, one of the things they really got out of my class was they know how to make a first impression. They have a great handshake, and how many times somebody has complimented on them. And it sounds like a small thing, but it's a big thing when it comes to employment and advancement and salary and all kinds of things.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things that we're talking about that start in the classroom, that start with some of those skills and it's actually, maybe they start at home, right? They start with some of those foundational things, because we mentioned parenting. And I think that there's a lot that can be in collaboration with parents and families about some of these skills. I think that you mentioned it earlier about communicating those things that you're reinforcing in school or you're learning, and like, here's the language that we're using. Here's an example of where your child's at with some of these skills. Because I think I mean, whether parents sort of articulate that or not, is like, we're all on the same team. We want students to be
For
successful.
sure.
We know that most families are wanting good things for their children. And so I
Yeah.
think the more that you can partner with them in communication of like, here's the skills we're working on in conjunction with the content. And so there's so much that I think that like school leaders can do of like, how are we articulating what college and career readiness means? It's not
Yeah.
just about those CTE classes or, getting them ready for their college applications, but it's other things as well.
Yeah, for sure. And just to chime on that really quickly, one of the things that's really hard about life skills is that they really are cemented from life experiences. And if we're speaking the same language, the parents are speaking the same language that they're learning in the classroom around these skills, then when that kid encounters that life event, which I call the reteachable moment, because we've already kind of taught them that concept of, like, for example, in a conflict, be curious, not furious, right? So once we teach that lesson around how do you approach a conflict from curious, not furious, now when they have an actual conflict in their life, if that parent can say, hey, how could you have approached that from a curious, not furious way? And how might that have helped? Bringing that same language into the reteachable moment when they've had a life experience, that's what cements the learning. My son, we teach a lesson around how to apologize. And it wasn't until he had to apologize in a really important way that he really used the skill and it stuck. And then he thought it was like the best lesson ever. But it's when that situation in life meets that skill that we've been teaching, a life skill either at home or in school, that really makes it sticky. And if we can all speak the same language, boy, does that help.
I mean, I even think about that. Like, I was just thinking about something in my English language classes, right? We would teach a lot about restating the question when you're answering just like a short answer question on a worksheet or
Mm-hmm.
something. And I remember a student going, that'd probably be good for job interviews, right? Like if they ask you a question and you just like repeat it, probably that's a good way to start out. And I was like, yes, that is actually an excellent way to start out. And it made me think about, this makes me think about, there's this program that we had I taught in Kansas, and there's a program in Kansas called Jobs for America's Graduate. And
Okay.
it's a class in middle school and high school that students are chosen for based on certain criteria in their lives. And it's building a lot of life skills, and they learn how to write a job up. They learn how to write a resume, how to apply for jobs, how to interview for jobs. They learn a lot of some of these life skills, a lot of very direct instruction. And some of it is even just them managing their time and their grades and having someone there, right? It's kind of a tier 2 type of class for
Yeah.
some of this work. And I was just thinking about how there's a lot of students that having that direct instruction for those things, that may not be relevant to them in their life at this moment. Like you said, matching them up with life experience, right? When I had students, the eighth graders, that would come and go, I'm filling out this job application for whatever, like a grocery store or something. And they're like, what do I write on here? And so
Yeah.
this idea of like how to fill out a job, it's like, that is just I don't think I knew how to do that until I had my parent help me or something, but sometimes the families aren't available, or they just need another adult in their life to help them navigate these things. And I was just thinking about how important that is for some of those direct conversations that you continue to have at the ready for when those life experiences come at them.
Yeah. So that brings a wonderful story, and it's a short story, but it's really powerful. And the story goes like this. There is a nomad in the desert, and this nomad is about to die of thirst and hunger when all of a sudden a voice says, take your camel 3 miles east, and there you will find an oasis. And the nomad says, oh, wait a minute. I'm in the desert. I must be hallucinating. But you know what? I'm not going to make it anyway. Might as well try. So he turns his camel to the east, and he starts to head to the east. And the voice comes down a second time and says, listen, when you get to the oasis, I want you to drink all the water you can drink. And I want you to, eat all you can eat. But then before you go to sleep, fill your pockets and fill your saddlebags with rocks. Nomad's like, that's crazy. I'm in the desert. I'll weigh down. But just then the camel sees the oasis and breaks into a gallop. And he's so happy that the oasis is there. And he dives off the camel and he drinks the water and he eats and he gets his fill. And right before he goes to sleep, he lays down on the side of the oasis and he says, wait a minute. The voice said one more thing. What am I supposed to do? Oh, yeah, pick up rocks. And he goes, I'm not going to pick up a bunch of rocks, but he looks at thousands of rocks and he goes, I'll just pick up one. So he picks up one little quarter-sized rock and puts it in his pocket and goes to sleep. Wakes up the next morning. He looks around the oasis. It's still there, but something's different. All the rocks are gone. And he reaches in his pocket to find the one rock he put in. And instead of a rock, he pulls out a quarter-sized ruby. And he goes, oh, yes, yes. And then he goes, oh, no. What it's all about is that the life lessons that we teach may feel like rocks to us in the moment that we hear them, but they turn into fabulous jewels down the road in our life when we know how to apologize effectively, or we know how to collaborate effectively, or we know how to make a first impression, or we know how to control our temper. And that's what we're trying to do in meaningful ways to get students college, career, and life ready.
Well, that's a really great illustration. And I think I'm thinking about this of like, what lessons did even my parents teach me? And later on, I'm like, oh yeah. Like I'm thinking about it and I'm like, I remember when I was younger, my mom would just say, do one thing at a time, just one thing at a time. And anytime I'm overwhelmed and I have so much stuff on my to-do list, I think, okay, I can only do one thing at a time. And that's a good way to get started and when you're overwhelmed. And I think about that. So that's a good reminder.
I was going to say a funny connection to this and what you just said is like my parents. One of the things that I grew up learning is the importance of, making other people feel seen and heard, making other people feel important, connecting with people around you that, that small talk that you do is not small. It's actually quite big. And it ties into another story that became at the beginning today. So, one of the things that I'm hilariously proud of is having a breakfast taco named after me at a local restaurant. And the way that happened is literally just, all the way through the pandemic, I'm walking to this restaurant to have breakfast in the morning, waking up, walking to this restaurant about 1.5 miles, walk there, walk home. That's my morning routine. And I have, a breakfast taco there. And I always ordered the same thing, which was a special breakfast taco, potato, egg, and cheese, but add fajita veggies. That's the secret. Anyway, and so I'm doing that and they're friendly with me and I start to get to know all the people. So I get to know the person behind the cash register. I get to know the cook. I get to know the people on the line. I get to know the people that, are just servicing me, with just, hello, how are you? Small talk, visiting, da, da, da. And then after a short period of time, they start recognizing me when I walk in and then they start saying, hey, do you want a Coach Rudy special? And I'm like, yes, I do. And then after a little bit of time, eventually the owner said, we're going to name it the Coach Rudy Special. And I'm like, that sounds great. And believe it or not, they sell like 60 of them a day. But it all came out of the social skill of making other people feel important, saying hello and connecting with people. And no, it's not some giant accomplishment, but it's a fun accomplishment. And, I really get a kick out of it. And when I walk in the morning, I look forward to walking in and them saying, hey, do you want a Coach Rudy Special? And it's a fun thing. And I believe that when we make the small talk and we visit with people with these small social skills, that's really good practice in our social skills that might help us meet our spouse or get a job or, find a great opportunity. The more you engage in these kinds of little conversations where you make other people feel important and you are curious about other people, the bigger the luck net you cast. We say that some people are lucky and some people aren't lucky. I think some people really cast a big luck net by constantly connecting with those around them that might connect them with an opportunity or another connection that might lead to an opportunity. I feel like that's an example of one of those social skills that met the right moment, that was instilled by my parents.
Well, and I think about it of like that kind of social skill is about opening doors, or just like you open all the
Sure.
doors and you're more likely to get the right people through the doors versus, closing the doors. So I feel like that there's a lot there to help students understand like the important, because I think there's times when you hear networking or you hear those things, but sometimes it's just being able to talk to people, being able to introduce yourself, being able to just present yourself with confidence or just greet people, be kind to the people around, as you engage, is a great way of just learning how to engage with the world around you in a positive and open mindset. I think that goes with the growth. There's growth mindset, but there's also this open-mindedness around
Mm-hmm.
engaging with people around you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really important life skill.
Amen.
There's so much that we could talk about with this because it is such a very encompassing thing, and there's such a big part of education. And I know, sometimes when I hear college and career readiness, I think, oh, that's just it's a thing that high school counselors do to help students get ready for when they leave high school. But I think that it starts small. It starts with the small things that educators do in helping them build those skills. And there's so many more questions I could ask, but I'd love to end the conversation just talking about what message about college and career and life readiness would you want to share with every campus administrator?
So I think the biggest thing that I would share is back to that metaphor of the roots in strong academics, the trunk in strong emotional intelligence skills, and then the branches of being able to access emerging technology and the open-minded for that. I love technology. I'm a huge fan of technology, and I believe the future will belong to people who can access and master new technology, but while still containing and, demonstrating uniquely human skills. Jack Ma, who is a futurist, and he's the creator of something called Alibaba, which is like kind of a predecessor even of Amazon. He said that we need to stop having kids try to compete with computers on computing skills. That's not going to happen. We need to help grow and nurture uniquely human skills that computers are going to have a hard time ever replicating. And so I really believe the future is going to belong to those students who have really high emotional intelligence and have the foundation in academics and the open-mindedness to access and master emerging technologies. And I think that this is something that is doable. But we need to have a little bit of a paradigm shift on what this looks like. And I don't believe it looks like everybody in the room looking at a screen. I believe that model that really got really popular in the pandemic, where, we all had Google Classroom and everybody had their one-to-one device and they all opened up their device and worked on their things in Google Classroom. I think that was a very successful model within the pandemic as far as getting productivity, but it is the blooming rose of technology has major thorns in our social, emotional, and our EQ skills. And we have got to get kids to talk to each other and collaborate and to engage and to have meaningful discussions and to disagree respectfully and, to do all of these things around content. And it sounds challenging and daunting, but it's really just good pedagogy. It's greet at the door. It's think, pair, shares. It's jigsaws and collaboration and, little group projects and competition. And I mean, that's what kids need. That's what humans need for human development.
Yeah. I mean, those are just distinctly human skills. I appreciate you so much being here to chat about this really important topic. And clearly you're passionate about it. And I know that we're going to continue to do things with you and hear more about School Connect and hear more about college and career readiness from you. So I'm so excited for that. And I just so appreciate you being here and talking about this topics.
It's my pleasure. And please, everybody, tune in January. I'll have some other school leaders that have been doing this work in meaningful ways. And also, please reach out to me on the socials. You can connect with me at EQ Coach_Rudy on Instagram or R Keeth Matheny on LinkedIn. And I'm a co-author of School Connect, which is a curriculum that teaches these skills. And then also I'm the author of a book called Excellent Teaching with SEL in the Middle. It's available on Amazon. And all of those are ways that you could connect with this if you were interested. But mainly just thank you all listeners for doing this work and helping grow great humans.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll include all of those things in the show notes so that everyone can check out your resources. So
awesome. Well, thanks, Larissa. Appreciate you very much.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Branching Minds.